Look, I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty f***ing early here, and I'm not having a good time. I'll get more entertaining. Probably. Check out the intro. This is noises from movies. They're pretty goddamn good. What's up, all? You've got Rob from Taurus Synth, and today we're going to talk some more about some soundtracks on vinyl from horror movies. There are so many great horror movie soundtracks. I have started the collection on vinyl. That's a meager collection. I've got maybe about 80 albums or something like that. And it's going to grow because that's one of the things I like to waste my money on. No, you don't have to listen to these on vinyl. I like them on vinyl. I really like them on vinyl. They're pretty. They've got all this stuff added to them. The sound quality's great, don't get me wrong, but yeah, digital sound quality's fine. Listen to them however you want. A great soundtrack ends up being something that you really like listening to outside of the movie, even that reminds you of the movie. At least that's how it is for me. So here are 5 more soundtracks that I really enjoy from horror movies and like listening to on their own regularly. At the number 5 spot today, we've got Pino Donaggio's Taurus Trap soundtrack. The soundtrack's so damn good, they had to put like 1/6 of the budget for the movie into it, when they didn't even have any money for this movie. Taurus Trap director David Schmoller got in touch with Pino Donaggio because Joe Dante, another director, was directing Piranha at the time of the filming of Taurus Trap. David Schmoller and Pino Donaggio both spoke Spanish. Joe Dante did not. So they did some translation for Joe. And then afterwards, David showed Pino his movie that he was working on with Taurus Trap and asked him if he wanted to be a part of it. He was like, hell yeah, I want to be a part of it. It was awesome. Good choice. Originally, David Schmoller wanted Pino Donaggio to make the movie soundtrack something like he had for the movie Carrie. Instead, Pino Donaggio, told him he wanted to do something a little bit different after seeing the material and thought he could bring a different spin to it. And the resulting soundtrack was great. How the soundtrack plays out for the movie gives it a very grand orchestral kind of sound to it, along with some very unsettling moments in it that really fit the mannequins in the movie. What kind of contrasted with the movie, though, was that this was such a big sound for such a movie that was pretty claustrophobic, and gave it an interesting dynamic that I think actually really worked out well for it. In places where everything was kind of crowded together, it opened it up and opened up the world for the movie. This sounds very pretentious. I don't really care. I think it really worked out well for it, and I think if you're a fan of the movie, that you probably agree with me that the soundtrack works for it, but let me know if you think otherwise. I think it was an interesting choice for it, and yeah, I think it worked out well overall. It seems David Schmoller thought so too, because the movie went from being about $300,000 for the budget of it to about an extra like $50,000 on top of that for Pino Donaggio's bill in this. So yeah, they were already behind on money for the movie, and I don't know how they made it up. I'm gonna ask them questions. But the movie got financed, and with a soundtrack that is pretty unique. Moving along to number 4 in the list for today is Friday the 13th Part 3. Friday the 13th Part 3's soundtrack was done by Harry Manfredini, who did the soundtrack to most of the Friday the 13th movies. You know, and I know, there's only one reason that Part 3 is on this list. And you know that reason is that funky opening and closing song. Nothing beats that. Friday the 13th Part 3 was by far the funkiest Friday the 13th, and one of my personal favorites. Yeah, this song really reflected that. It's got that, that funkiness mixed with kind of like a progressive rockiness. Again, works well for me. I think worked well for a lot of people because that is the song that a lot of people think of when they think of Friday the 13th music, besides the, the ch-ch-ch, ma-ma-ma. And if you like a lot of that ma stuff, there's a ton of that in there too. I mean, everything that Harry Manfredini writes has a ton of that for Friday the 13th. And I love that stuff. I mean, it was great. It leaves that unsettling, outside in the woods in the middle of the night kind of sound, where it goes in and out of the softer parts and then, into the frantic parts with the frantic horns and, sharp tones in there. Works really great. It's just, all right, it's just real talk. I can't tell any of it any different from Friday the 13th Part 1 through 4 or whatever. All of it sounds the same. Yeah, I said it, because it's true. Can you pick out the song from the lake over, in Part 2 versus Part 3 at, Higgins Haven? Better person than I am, then. But that's why, for me, when talking about Friday the 13th movie soundtracks, Part 3 is always going to be the top. Because it's got that great opening closing song. It's one of my favorite movies in general in the franchise. And it's got the same sound that if you like Harry Manfredini's music, you're going to find on the other ones. So yeah, definitely Part 3 for me. I also own Part 2 on vinyl. Sometimes I play one and then the other. Still can't tell the difference. Still sounds the same. Moving right along to number 3 spot on this list today, we've got Lucio Fulci's The Beyond with the soundtrack done by Fabio Frizzi. Now, I'm a big Fabio Frizzi fan, and for me, this is his best work. The operatic nature of this album, mixed with the funky 70s kind of a sound to it, that again has kind of a prog rock kind of a styling to it, reminiscent of the way that Goblin plays some of that kind of music. Come to think of it, just as much as Goblin has played on movies made by Dario Argento and things like that, the counterpart to that is almost how much Lucio Fulci has done work with Fabio Frizzi. I often speak of the work of Fabio Frizzi and Goblin in the same breath. While overall, I would say, Goblin has a little more diverse material, Fabio Frizzi, for what he does, he really nails it in that Italian style that was, became kind of classic for the 70s horror movies of that ilk. The album together works really well, listening to the full album, because it kind of builds on some of the same musical themes and keeps ramping it up and getting, more full and more boisterous throughout the album. I believe it's called Voci del Nulla. Voca del Nulla? Voci del Nulla? It's Italian. I'm going to stop trying. Sound a little less racist, maybe. Your voices out of nowhere, I think is what it translates to. It should, because I looked it up beforehand. I also don't know how to pronounce it, but you'll find it if you look for the soundtrack, or if you know the soundtrack. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you do. And if you don't, you should check it out. I think it's really some of his best work by far. The song comes together so well. The whole album comes together so well. And like I said, kind of a theme that underlies throughout it musically. Definitely worth listening to as a full album. And, other great songs in there too that aren't tied just to that one theme. I saw Fabio Frizzi a couple of years ago at a show, and it was a pretty small show. It was like 80 people or something. I yelled out, "I love you." He said he loved me too, but he doesn't love me. He doesn't even know me. I like to think he loves me. I mean, even if he doesn't, it's fine. You just don't say it if you don't mean it. Fabio, don't say it if you don't mean it. Hitting the number 2 spot today, even stronger than me and Fabio's reported love for each other, is Cannibal Holocaust by Riz Ortolani. And oh boy, is this a mess of an album. Nothing about this should work. It's all over the place. There's no stable mood. There's no stability whatsoever. Have you seen the movie? Yeah, well. 1 minute you've got opening up with a 70s folk lullaby kind of song. There's very big juxtaposition between the material you'll see later in the movie and what's happening as the movie opens up. And then you move on to things like, tribal string and synth compositions with just a lot of impact and a lot of downtrodden nature to them. And then the next minute you're listening to something that sounds like it's from the damn circus. So yeah, stability of the album as a whole, not really there. Doesn't need to be, because damn, the music is beautiful. It's all great. Even the sillier parts in it. But I would say the majority of it really does have that, that downtrodden kind of sound in it that's, where they actually even use like a synthesizer, almost like a drum beat in parts of it. And yeah, if you guys have seen the movie, you'll obviously remember that. That might not be the first thing you remember about the movie. But yeah, it's got a very interesting soundtrack. And I think it really stands up. And I think even for people, this is of course a controversial movie. I happen to love it myself. Not the animal cruelty parts, but everything else about it really. And but even if you don't, I think a lot of people, can find something just musician-wise, really that you can appreciate about the album. I mean, if you like horror movie soundtrack, music, which I imagine you do. I feel like I've had this conversation before. If you don't, what are you doing here? There's probably some like cooking channel or something. You know, forget that. No, what I mean is subscribe. Subscribe. Whew. Hey, we're at the #1 spot, so that means it's time for me to talk about Maniac by Jay Chataway. While we're talking about the 1980 Maniac done by William Lustig, the soundtrack, just of note, for the 2012 version, the remake with Elijah Wood, yeah, I know, that threw us all for a loop. It was actually good. And the soundtrack was good too. So yeah, check that out. That's a bonus one. But today we're talking about the 1980 soundtrack, and damn is it good. I feel like because there's so much people say about this movie all the time, and there's always more to be said about the content of the movie, that the soundtrack doesn't get maybe as much love as it should, in my opinion. For those of you who've listened to me rant about music before, it's no secret that I like heavy synth and I like it in my horror movies. Now this has got that, and it's a little different than some of the regular synth or heavier synth than you usually find in these kinds of movies. More of the kind of stuff, is usually like Fabio Frizzi or Goblin, like other bands that I've talked about a number of times. But this has kind of got a darker tone to it. Not that other stuff can't be dark, because it can, but this has got more of a kind of manic at times, but then very depressed and, mixing back and forth between the two, just like the character in the movie. There's a somberness that then meets with an intensity, and like I said, kind of ramps up and then, slows back down. And, listening to this as a whole album is, really an interesting listen, because you will have those ups and downs throughout the whole album. And, I do like that when an album can, stay diverse like that, but also have kind of a cohesive piece as well. Except if it's Cannibal Holocaust, then it doesn't need to be cohesive. Not if it doesn't want to. The album manages to successfully pull off, synths that can be droning 1 minute and trancey, and in the next minute, kind of have that, that kind of funkiness that is known for this kind of horror movie music of the, to the mid '70s through the early '80s, and do both really successfully. And like I said, kind of balance that out. And that's pretty tough to do. And since it's a different kind of soundtrack in general, definitely gets major accolades from me. And it's got pan flute. I love pan flute. All right, so we're ending on pan flute today. That's interesting, sure. Guys, thanks so much for watching, commenting, liking, subscribing, sharing, all the good stuff. And please remember to join for the next time. We are going to have another installment of this for sure, because I like doing this and I have enough albums to do it, so why not? So folks, until then, please comment and tell me, what do you like about horror movies of this time period? Which ones am I missing? What things do you like the most? Do you like the synth kind of stuff as much as I do? Or do you like the orchestral stuff better? Or, what do and don't you like from that time period? Or any other horror movie soundtracks in general. Also, feel free to tell me why Fabio Frizzi won't email me back. The first couple were really nice. I was kind. They got a little bit aggressive. I toned it back, all right? I know when to stop. I know when I've been wrong. I just want to be friends.